So thanks very much for the invitation and for the organizers and ILSI. These are my disclosures. So the title of my talk is Cognitive Control of Food Reward and Translational Applications. Aside from the financial disclosures, I have to do 3 more disclosures. So in this talk, I'm going to be focusing on cognition, so I'll be biased. So we have heard a lot during this symposium about food reward mechanisms and homeostatic mechanisms. So think of it as an integrative, in an integrative way. And so, but I will be focusing specifically in my talk in the cognitive side. Okay, so it will be like complementary to other talks. Then I'll be showing more like neuroimaging data. And having said that, there is always this hype of using fMRI images to show your case and obviously, there is a lot of behavioral research that has been done, for many years. That for me, coming from an angle of neurology and neuroscience, I tend to use examples that are more like pictures and fMRI. But sometimes I neglect a little bit of the behavioral literature. But we have to see that with that perspective. And so I'll be trying to fill in gaps and illustrate some of the points by building and bringing examples from different, sometimes like unrelated areas. So there is a lot of need in this area of addressing specific questions and conducting direct research to have direct evidence for some of the mechanisms that I'm proposing. But I'll try to give an idea with the illustrations that I'm going to be showing. So the summary of the talk is here, so I'm going to be showing an introduction, then the link of cognition and cognitive control with body weight and obesity, then with overeating and food craving, then translational applications, and some few words about potential implications for policy, and then I will wrap up with some conclusions. So in a reward-centric view of food intake regulation that probably this symposium focuses on, we have seen evidence from the previous talks that reward-related brain regions obviously are related to appetizing food and are involved in food intake, but also there is a bidirectional influence, so that there is some evidence that appetizing food could also modify and lead to plasticity changes at the level of these reward-related brain regions. And to put the full pictures, we have modulators coming from homeostasis, and also from the top down, cognitive control. That's what I've been focusing in my talk. So cognitive control is important, and it becomes more and more important as we move up into the animal scale from rodents to humans. We can compare here like some experimental studies done in rodents where they are isolated in cages and there's only a single option in some cases for food. So it's a very different scenario from the natural life and our daily lives, where we are, it has been estimated that we make between 200 and 250 decisions related to food every single day, and we navigate in amazingly complex environments such as supermarkets like this, which carry, it has been estimated that the average US supermarket carries more than 40,000 items. So there's a lot of cognitive burden associated with that, and probably is likely to play a big role in the way we eat nowadays. An extreme example I've been fascinated by this example, and Juan Navia, who is here, was mentioned in this example is the case of hunger strike. So some individuals have the capacity or taken to the extreme of fast till death for a political, abstract, symbolic reason. Okay, so I brought this diary from Bobby Sands, who was an Irish activist, and he was also a poet, and he died during the course of a hunger strike in the 80s during Margaret Thatcher ruling. And he wrote very interesting diaries, and he was sharing his experiences as he was going through the hunger strike. And he was talking about the desire, that the food cravings that he was experiencing for brown whole meat bread, butter, that cheese, etc. But he kind of tried to put them down, saying that human food can never keep a man alive forever. I console myself, with some sort of like long-term goals, and he will get a great feed up above. And he said that I consider there is a kind of fight indeed. The body fights back, sure enough, but at the end of the day, everything returns to the primary consideration, that is the mind the mind is the most important. This looks like obviously an extreme case, but to some extent we face on a daily basis the common dilemma of either go for immediate reward that is provided by palatable food that is widely available in the environment, or restrain from that and then basically align our decisions related to food with internal goals such as staying healthy and controlling weight. So to do a summary of pretty much what the neuroscience literature is showing is that these two options, or these two possibilities, there is evidence that are basically supported by two partly separated systems, but there is obviously a lot of overlap, as I mentioned before. But you can see here that these are these areas that are more prominently involved in processing reward aspects of food, and these are the regions that we hear a lot about those regions. But on the other hand, we have the top-down system, cognitive control, that basically help us align our decisions and our eating behavior on the basis of rules, goals, norms, such as a diet, or political reasons, as we said before, religion codes, normal and social norms, etc. And the cognitive control areas, there are many areas, but basically a simplification of that is shown here. Like they are mostly involve lateral prefrontal areas, dorsolateral, ventrolateral, and the lateral sectors of the orbitofrontal cortex, also the parietal cortex, and some medial regions in the prefrontal cortex located around the dorsal anterior cingulate and the pre-supplementary motor area. These are like the most fundamental areas involving cognitive control. Cognitive control is related directly with executive functions, which are the highest mental functions that we humans are uniquely have developed over evolution. And executive functions support, in general, goal-oriented behavior, but also goal-oriented eating behavior, as I said before. And they rely on three pillars, or three main components, that are inhibitory control, which is our ability to suppress an ongoing response, or to stop prepotent or impulsive action. And this can be tested with tasks such as the go. There's very famous go-no-go task where participants have to press a button when they see a cue, and that cue gets very repeated, so it's very it happens pretty much of the time, like 75% of the trials or so, and once in a while there is another cue that signals that the subject has to stop pressing a response. So that's called the go-no-go task. But there is also another pillar of executive functions is cognitive flexibility, or the ability to switch between tasks. This can be tested with tasks such as the train making, where subjects have to draw a line between letter number. So A1, B2, C3, etc. So switch rules. And also working memory, especially the executive aspects of working memory, manipulation. So working memory is basically our ability to maintain representations in mind to guide behavior, and this can be tested with tasks such as the go-no-go task, the N-back task that you can see here. This is a two-back task. So the subject is seeing different letters, and the subject has to keep in mind the letter that was presented 2 trials before. So in this case, the G was presented, the subject is seeing this G, and it was presented 2 trials before, so it presses the button. So a combination of these 3 main components of executive functions is believed, according to current cognitive models, to underlie pretty much our executive functions like decision making and other more complex cognitive functions. So the implication of this in eating behavior can be illustrated by several examples, recent examples from the neuroimaging. So here subjects are exerting voluntary control over hunger. And this is a study that was published in 2009. This is using PET, and subjects, in this case men, were consciously suppressing hunger when they were presented with foods that they really liked. And this was done under 17 to 19 hours of fasting. So you see the areas that get inhibited during the conscious suppression of hunger, and these are the areas that pretty much overlap with the areas that I showed you before in red. Okay, so the reward-related circuits are suppressed by consciously suppressing hunger. The same kind of dissociation can be seen with similar approaches. This is an fMRI study that was where subjects were exposed to pictures This was done actually also combining pictures of food and pictures of cigarettes, but pretty much they found similar results. And here you can see the dissociation between the cognitive control regions and the reward-related regions, pretty much. So here subjects were exposed to pictures of appetizing food, and they were labeled with later, the word later, or the word now. So they were asked to consciously think about immediately eating the food that they were seeing in the now condition, or thinking about the long-term consequences of eating that food in the later condition. So when you suppress the later minus the now, you see the cognitive control regions, okay, and then now minus later, you see the other regions pretty much, as I showed you before, which is kind of similar to the regions that you see in the hunger study. But this does not only happen during conscious suppression of, or conscious inhibitory control or suppression of hunger and food reward. This can also be seen on the go as we decide and make decisions about what to eat. And this is a study that came out in 2009 with fMRI as well, where dieters and non-dieters were scanned. They were first asked to rate pictures of food by healthiness and also by taste in a second run. And in another run, they were asked to make decisions. So dieters who were rejecting appetizing yet unhealthy food, they engaged these areas, the cognitive control areas, specifically in the left dorsolateral prefrontal cortex, and the authors also found a circuit and connections, basically, or something that is called functional connectivity through this intermediate network, or intermediate node here, with the medial, ventromedial prefrontal cortex that basically is involved in processing the value, okay, of food. So, so dorsolateral prefrontal cortex activity is required for that's the conclusion of the paper, is required for higher order factors such as health to be incorporated into the reward related areas or the evaluation system. So there is link with between cognitive control of food intake and body weight and obesity, and actually there is a link from different perspectives. There is a link before weight gain or obesity appears. So there is a study that came out this year, and it was a study where it is a very famous study that is related to the marshmallow task. So children who were able to delay immediate gratification, so when they were presented with a marshmallow and they were asked to wait until the experimenter was coming to get another marshmallow, so they had to basically delay the gratification of immediate gratification of eating the marshmallow, so they have to be patient and control. So the experimenter was coming sometime afterwards and bringing another marshmallow. So this is a measure of self-regulation. The delayed discounting task is called. So this measure is actually a predictor, or is associated in prospectively with a follow-up of 30 years. So the performance in this self-regulatory task at 8 years was predicting BMI status in the 30s. So this link seems to appear before with these correlational or associational studies. There is also during, and there is a lot of evidence now piling up, and this is a recent systematic review of the link between body mass index and different cognitive tasks. And as you can see here, there is a lot of association in the executive domains, especially in inhibitory control, as you can see here, shown in green, and other aspects such as working memory. So there is a lot of association between executive functions and body mass index. This is the conclusion of this systematic review. So there is an inverse association. So the higher the BMI, the lower executive functions, performance in these tasks. And also there is a link after. So weight loss is also in this meta-analysis is associated with some mild improvements in cognition that include executive function. So we see the link with cognitive control and body weight before weight gain occurs, during and after. This is associational evidence, but at least suggests some sort of a temporal relation. There is also a link with weight stability through personality factors. So prospective long and prospective studies looking at changes in personality and the prediction of personality factors in terms of body weight over life. These were studies that were done in around 2,000 individuals followed for several decades. They conclude that scores high scores in a personality factor that is called conscientiousness, that is related to self-regulation, and the neural correlates are in the middle frontal gyrus around the dorsolateral prefrontal cortex, is highly associated with weight stability across decades. And obviously we have data that Eric Stites was presented before. I believe that gray matter volume in inhibitory control regions is inversely related to weight gain, with a follow-up of 1 year. So this finding seems to suggest some association with weight stability and weight gain. Okay, and there's also a link with weight loss maintenance. So members of the National Weight Control Registry, who are naturally very good and successful at losing a large amount of weight and keeping it off for a long period of time, they show signs of higher activity in lateral prefrontal cortex when they are presented with food pictures. And you can see here, this has been shown in this fMRI study, but also earlier with a PET study, just looking at immediate responses of satiation. So just PET responses in terms of like brain perfusion following a meal. So successful weight losers were associated with higher perfusion in these dorsolateral prefrontal cortex areas, so cognitive control regions. In terms of causality, I'm also mentioning this study done in the mini pigs, where obviously causal evidence is very hard to find in humans. So in animal models, experimental overfeeding leading to obesity has been shown in mini pigs, leading to hypoperfusion in some areas, and there are some rewarded areas, but you can see changes in areas that could be related to areas in humans of cognitive control, like the dorsolateral prefrontal cortex, the anterior prefrontal cortex, as well as the insula, as well as the nucleus accumbens here, you can see. But you can see the cognitive control homologous here that are one of the areas that show larger effects. So there is a hypoperfusion in association with experimental obesity. So this suggests this interaction. So obviously a lot of this is associational data that awaits direct confirmation, but decreased executive functions or performance or capacity or skills could lead over time to weight gain and obesity. But it's as well, weight gain and obesity feeds back and also can impair the function of executive functions and these lateral prefrontal areas involving cognitive control. There is far more limited data in the field of overeating. If we focus on the behavioral side, just overeating and food craving. So we know from the brain lesion literature that brain lesions that affect lateral prefrontal areas, not only but also other related areas can lead by themselves to overeating and food cravings and sweet tooth. So there is a syndrome that is called gourmand syndromes, where after lesions affecting mostly right frontal insular areas, these patients develop a sudden excessive preoccupation with food, and they can shop around, they can shop into a very specific shop that is, they can travel for hours to find a specific food they become obsessed with, and they shop it every single day. It's kind of like very obsession for food. The link with body weight is not very clear, but there is obviously a very clear behavioral link. This is data in patients with frontotemporal dementia, which is a neurodegenerative disorder that you can see like changes in green matter over time. So those patients who lose these lateral prefrontal areas, as well as other areas in the insula and other areas, but pretty much, or to a large extent, these lateral prefrontal cortex areas are associated with these symptoms: overeating, sweet tooth, and in the case of lateral orbitofrontal, with hyperphagia, and also binge eating-like symptoms in these areas, and as well as the striatum and the insula as well, but also involving the lateral prefrontal areas. This suggests causality somehow that prefrontal lesions could lead by themselves to behavioral changes associated with overeating and food craving. So coming back to this pathway, so we would expect that decreased executive functions or prefrontal lesions, as we said, could lead to overeating and potentially to weight gain. There's not so much data on that, even though some of these patients, it has been reported that they gain weight. And then on the other hand, we have this loop, this circle. So this raises a lot of questions, whether also overeating by itself could already be impacting. The changes associated in the brain with overeating could be impacting prefrontal function and executive functions. We still don't know that. There's some sort of indirect evidence that I'm going to be presenting. And whereas the particular role of certain foods, or is this related to specific foods or related to taste, or whether there is a dose effect, or whether scheduling of intake has anything to do with this. There's a lot of open questions in there. So we know from some experiment, this one and some other experiments that replicated this, that food craving interfere with cognitive performance, especially interfere with working memory tasks, especially the visuospatial abilities. And so they could transiently impair performance in working memory tasks and interfere with cognitive performance. This could be something situational. And also we have this data from frenetic studies that he presented before. So also in regular intake of, this study is the study in the regular intake of ice cream and the milkshake study. So some of the areas that were associated with regular consumption of ice cream involve areas that are located in the lateral prefrontal cortex, even though this was not the main hypothesis of the study, but this is reported in the supplementary information. So meaning that regular consumers of ice cream also show hypoactivation, not only in the striatal areas, but also in these areas that could be associated either with attentional aspects or cognitive control. We don't know. They tend to co-activate. Also, it's very hard to tease out, but this is we can see that here. So let's move into translational applications, how we can make sense of these, and to move this into potential interventions or therapies, or try to develop tools or things to help people eat better or more healthy. So coming back to the model of these two systems, there are two options, either decreasing the activity of the reward system or enhancing the activity of the cognitive control system. I'm going to be focusing on this strategy, obviously because of the cognitive bias that I'm bringing, but I would also expect that enhancing cognition and cognitive control in general would have broader effects, like in things of stress control, emotional regulation, less risk of other diseases like depression, mood disorders, anxiety. There's a lot of additional benefits associated with this strategy of enhancing cognitive control. So if we have this model, or this is the hypothesis that the data is suggesting, one of the things, and this is a forum where there is a lot of interest for food, one could think that, could we design something like a neurocognitive enhancement diet? Could that be possible? That just by eating we could kind of like make those areas to grow or become more stronger? And can certain foods enhance executive functions and related brain regions? And could this be used to facilitate at least or support weight control or weight loss maintenance, so that we move to the system to weight control and weight loss maintenance and away from the overeating pathway? So this is still an open question, but I'm going to be showing some recent studies, and these are experimental studies that show changes related to certain foods in these circuits that are involved in cognitive control. So we could hypothesize that this could be supported some sort of like, but this is a hypothesis. Obviously we need direct evidence, but you can see that, for instance, in the opposite direction, if we put sedentary men into a high-fat diet for 7 days, 70% of the total calories, so it's a lot of fat, impairs the ability to focus attention. Okay, so we know that this is one component of executive function, so we can turn it down just by 7 days of high-fat diet. This study that we see here, it was done in children, in boys of around, I think, 8 years old or 10 years old. So daily intake of omega-3 in the form of DHA between 400 and 1,200 milligrams for 8 weeks was associated with remodeling. So basically led to an increase in the levels of DHA in membranes of erythrocytes, and the authors were using this as a biomarker of the amount of DHA impact in the kids. And the kids were doing a working memory task, an NBAC task, and these were the areas that were associated with the increase in the levels of DHA in the membranes of erythrocytes as they were performing the NBAC task. So you see an enhancement in the recruitment of these lateral prefrontal areas here, but also in other regions as well. But pretty much more prominently here, which are areas that we could relate to the cognitive control somehow, but this remains to be tested. There is also this study that came up also recently, where a 24-hour high nitrate diet with consisting of leafy green veggies, mostly like spinaches and some veggies, and beetroot juice, leads to increased brain perfusion in the dorsolateral prefrontal cortex and anterior cingulate cortex of older adults. And actually, this is brain perfusion data. And when you look at these changes, it looks pretty interesting. And actually, these are areas that we know from neurology. These are areas that are in the intersection of the anterior cerebral anterior artery and the middle cerebral artery. So basically, these are areas where usually all people get watershed, or people who have brain hypoperfusion, they get watershed infarcts. So this is interesting, and the changes were focused on white matter, but I thought this was interesting with just 24 hours. All these studies were controlled and experimental. There is also some other data using FNIRS. That is a technique that I will be talking more about in a minute. And this is a study that was done, another experimental study was done testing essence of chicken twice daily versus placebo for 7 days. And you could see an enhancement in activity in these lateral prefrontal areas, like dorsolateral and ventrolateral prefrontal areas during a working memory task. And this was described with FNIRS, which I think these are small studies and experimental, but we can again some information. This is another study that where subjects were tested for many tasks and all that. I'm not gonna go in, but they show some effects associated with fissure. So one of the things that we see that as we are developing a model, and the data suggests that the existence of these two systems and the potential of cognitive control to overcome or at least reverse the food reward aspects of food craving and overeating. So we also need to develop methodologies and tools that can help us quickly evaluate interventions or foods and techniques that are more affordable and portable and convenient. So one of these techniques could be functional near-infrared spectroscopy that is based on the hemodynamic response, similar to the fMRI, but it's portable, cheap. It can be tested on a daily basis with subjects. It's very convenient. And this could, things like that, or also the development of computerized tests that assess these aspects of cognitive control. This could be very helpful to accelerate discovery, development of database of food products, and optimization and personalization of diets to support neurocognitive enhancement. One of the key questions also that I think one of the big challenges that we're going to be facing is that the data suggests, or I see that way, is that we will not, reversing the system to normality will not be enough. At least if we want to use cognitive control to reverse overeating and obesity, we will need to go supranormal. Okay, so there is some evidence suggesting that if you look at the brains of successful weight loss maintainers, they have stronger frontal activation than lean subjects, okay, in response to food stimuli, either images of food or oral stimulation with food. So they overactivate the prefrontal cortex, even compared with lean people, okay? And this draws some similarities in the context of addiction with alcoholism and cocaine. So we know that resistance to alcoholism in unaffected first-degree relatives, so people who have a relative who is alcoholic in the family and carry some predisposition but are not alcoholic, they show, if you compare their brains, they show signs of hyperfrontality. So you see huge activation in these prefrontal areas, suggesting that they resist or are resilient to the addictive predisposition by engaging cognitive control. So this could be one pathway to resist the motivational or the addictive side In this case, alcoholism, but it could be translated also to food. And also, successful weight, people who were successful in cocaine abstinence and smoking, also they show signs of heightened prefrontality. So they're able to maintain drugs off by engaging and hyperactivating the prefrontal cortex, even compared with normal non-addicts who were never addicts in their lives and with no predisposition. So there are a lot of ongoing strategies that I'm going to go not much into detail, but that are being tested for this. So to enhance cognitive control, we have cognitive behavioral therapy, cognitive training, non-invasive brain stimulation, neurofeedback, mindfulness, exercise, medications. But one of the pathways that I'm taking is using non-invasive brain stimulations, which is some neurotechnologies that are available that allow us to interfere with brain circuits and potentially enhance the activity of those circuits with certain specificity. And two techniques are transcranial magnetic stimulation and transcranial direct current stimulation. And there's some single session data suggesting that one session of transcranial direct current stimulation directed to enhance activity in the dorsolateral prefrontal cortex can lead to an acute suppression of craving, acute decrease of craving, desire to eat, and snack intake. This has been replicated in several studies. And also decreased fixation toward food using eye tracking. So I'm running two trials to move this to whether we can use that to facilitate weight loss in two contexts. First, after gastric banding, and second, after a very low calorie diet for 10 weeks. So I'm also working with neural engineers to know more, what could be the best montage and to optimize these in terms of targeting, etc. So to finish up, I'm going to talk about potential implications for policy. So obviously we have restricted the discussion to the individual level, but on top of the individual level, we have the family environment level that is also affecting these interactions, the microenvironmental level like neighborhoods, schools, and the microenvironmental level. So all this is ultimately affecting the individual relationship with food, reward, cognition, food, and homeostasis. So we have to think about strategies that ultimately facilitate and reverse, the balance. And something that some sort of guidelines that we can get from integrating data or thoughts from the cognitive psychology literature is that this system, this duality of system, has been proposed from many aspects of cognition, like decision making, social cognition. We know that this system tends to be an intuitive. The reward-related system could, if we extrapolate these theories, the dual process theories, could be an intuitive, automatic, unconscious, preconscious, experiential, heuristic, rigid, associative, rapid, and low-effort system. And extrapolating from findings from other fields, we know that it can be enhanced by stress, sleep deprivation, sedentary lifestyle, social deprivation, or low socioeconomic status. And the cognitive control system is deliberative, rational, abstract, mostly conscious, rule-based, flexible, slow, high effort, typically is vulnerable and has limited capacity and takes long to fully develop. This is important for children, and can be enhanced by several things like physical activity, social support, education, good sleep, high socioeconomic status, meditation. So to conclude, cognitive control is a key regulator of food reward. It is relevant to resist and overcome food cravings, overeating, and obesity. Strategies to enhance cognitive control over food can be beneficial, but many questions remain open. For instance, intensity, best approach, schedule, supranormality. Maybe we need supranormality to rebalance the system through cognitive control. Maybe the future could be combining different approaches to really push the system. And neurocognitive evaluations of food and neurotechnologies, I believe strongly that they will offer new opportunities to accelerate knowledge in this field. Thank you, that's it.